Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Senior cabinet ministers have sought to reassure Brexit supporters that there'll be no backtracking by the Prime Minister after the government offered to hold fresh talks with Labour on the UK's departure from the EU. One cabinet minister described Labour's proposals for a permanent customs union with the EU after the UK has left as a dangerous delusion. Our political editor Laura Kunsberg reports.
He doesn't look that enthusiastic about a compromise.
Has the PM met your demands, Mr Corbyn? Good morning.
But are Jeremy Corbyn and the government moving any closer together? With huge numbers of Tory MPs disgruntled at the Prime Minister's deal, any sign from Labour they're willing to talk counts.
Which direction is the Prime Minister heading in? Is she firstly simply trying to get her own team back on board to put her deal yet again with some supposed changes? And that's what it looks like she's doing. Or is she genuinely looking to see whether there's a majority for Labour's proposal?
Remember, Theresa May's deal was comprehensively booted out by Parliament last month, so she's desperate for votes. Last week, Jeremy Corbyn wrote to Theresa May outlining what could get his party over the line. And last night, she wrote back to him dangling some Labour-friendly promises of protections for workers and the environment, cash for Labour constituencies. She is, though, a million miles from getting the opposition officially on board, even though some Labour MPs are tempted to move.
After months of whispers, this deal-making is out in the open now.
I think that there would be a number of Labour MPs, we estimate it's somewhere between 40 and 60, who are actively looking for ways to support this at the moment.
There is one particularly sticky point. The Trade Secretary signed today to keep us trading with Switzerland like we do now in future. Even though similar talks with other countries are behind schedule, he and the Prime Minister are adamant we must have the power to sign our own trade deals. But Labour wants to be in a customs union, closer ties for business, but more rules.
It's very clear from the European Union that non-EU members do not have a say in EU trade policy. So to pretend that you could do so is a dangerous delusion.
And Brexiteer anger always lurks. Being part of a customs union would be unacceptable to plenty on the Tory side. So if the Prime Minister is really serious about budging to win some Labour votes, she'd do so, potentially driving more of her own ranks away.
Corbyn's proposal would keep us locked in the customs union, locked in much of the single market forever, and therefore Brexit, the promise that was made to the British people of coming out of the EU institutions, would be broken.
Pleasing all of the people all of the time was never going to happen. The Prime Minister's challenge is to satisfy enough MPs in Parliament to save her deal. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, Theresa May has been warned by senior Conservatives not to negotiate with Labour over Brexit. That's raising questions about Mrs May's willingness to compromise with the opposition after her letter to Jeremy Corbyn yesterday didn't rule out discussions on keeping Britain inside a customs union. The International Trade Secretary Liam Fox dismissed Labour's plans as unworkable, while Boris Johnson warned that such a deal would have a disastrous effect on the Conservative Party. Mrs May will update MPs tomorrow, as our political editor Gary Gibbon now reports.
The taxi demonstration brought gridlock around Parliament. There's not much progress inside either. This week had been billed as high noon, a moment of reckoning. It's another week of delay and tumbleweed.
The number of important weeks that we've had that then turned out to be total damp squibs, and I fear that this one may be something of a damp squib.
Normally, the last few weeks have been typified by, I would have had 4 calls from the Whip's office on a Sunday. I haven't had any this weekend, which almost worries me, that it's all gone a little bit quiet.
The EU insists there are no negotiations going on in Brussels either. They say they're waiting for UK proposals. The biggest development was another moment in the unlikely political courtship between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn. A letter from her to him engaging with his Brexit plan, outlined in a letter to her last week. The detail in these letters and the civility on display, not something you normally see between the two leaders. Dear Jeremy, I'm grateful for this, thank you for that. All of this can deceive. Theresa May wants to appear open to cross-party dialogue, but she also wants to terrify some of her recalcitrant MPs, show them you could have Jeremy Corbyn's version of Brexit if you don't vote for mine. And as for Jeremy Corbyn, some close to him say they think the chances of him actually voting for Theresa May's version of Brexit is about 0.1%. He's all about showing that he is truly involved in the process. Some close to him think his plummeting personal poll ratings have been a lot to do with the fact voters think he's not actually engaged in Brexit. In the end, she's probably still pursuing the same deal, isn't she? These other tracks are about either sweetening people in her own party or frightening them by being seen to be talking to Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think that, she's stated many, many times her discomfort around the proposals that Jeremy Corbyn is making. So I'd be very surprised if she was suddenly come down on the side of those customs union-based proposals and at the same time risk the relationship with her own colleagues.
I don't think that there's any mileage for the Prime Minister or for the government in trying to do a deal with Labour, because they will just try to trap Theresa May. They will just try to do a deal that is toxic and that has disastrous effects for the Conservative Party.
Well, Boris Johnson was pushing back against Jeremy Corbyn's call for membership of the customs union. Some of those backbench Labour MPs Theresa May has been wooing in private to back her deal say she must dial down the anti-customs union rhetoric.
The thing that's missing right now is any level of trust that she actually means what she says. The difficulty is that we go into those meetings and have discussions with her about protecting workers' rights, about giving Parliament a role in what comes next, about potentially exploring arrangements for a permanent customs union, and she nods and smiles, and then Tory MPs go in and say we want to tear all of that up, and she nods and smiles, and she seems to believe that we don't talk to one another.
The International Trade Secretary signed a temporary trade deal with Switzerland, so there's something in place if Britain leaves the EU without a deal. There are many more of these still to sign, with time running out. The reason MPs like Nick Bowles insist they will come back with an amendment trying to force the government to ban no deal. Just not yet.
By the end of February, we're hopeful that there will be a clear majority of MPs who will be willing, even sometimes at the cost of their own jobs, to back a process of ensuring that we ask for a short extension to be able to come up with a compromise deal. I don't believe that this week a sufficient number of MPs are willing to take that step.
Malta's Prime Minister visited Downing Street this evening. Theresa May will tell MPs in a statement tomorrow why they should be patient and wait for her Plan B to take shape, with only 46 days left to the Brexit date.
Well, with me now are two Labour MPs, Angela Smith, who supports a second referendum and tried to deliver a petition to Labour HQ to that effect earlier today, only to be turned away, and John Mann, who supported the Prime Minister's deal in the January vote. Angela Smith first. I mean, the fact that you were turned away from your own party headquarters with this petition to support a second referendum, it's time to acknowledge, isn't it, that a second vote is dead?
Well, I mean, it's beginning to look that way, and I think there will be thousands of Labour members and voters who will feel very disheartened by the turn of events today. I mean, last week the letter, and we now know that Keir's paragraph was excluded, the paragraph in which the people's vote was, mentioned. And now today, with my petition turned away by party headquarters.
So Jeremy Corbyn's too busy sort of sending nice letters to Theresa May to entertain
Well, it seems so, and pursuing what I think is a fantasy deal which isn't going to materialise.
Right, well, John Mann, you're backing that fantasy deal. Are you being honest with your constituents that any Brexit will make them poorer and that you and Jeremy Corbyn are facilitating that?
I'm very, very honest with my constituents in saying, this is what you voted for, here's the issues, here's not the issues.
So even if it makes you poorer, you're delivering it?
No, I don't think it will make them poorer. What I've made clear is that a no deal will have lots of problems that they need to be aware of, and those problems will be quite large, especially in the short term. And so the option of no deal does have a lot of immediate consequences.
Angela Smith, Brexit's not going to make the point.
But John, I mean, you and I agree on most things, but on this, I'm afraid we can't, because all the economic analysis shows it will make us poorer. So any funding that Theresa May offers in return for getting her deal over the line will not compensate for the money that's lost to the economy as a consequence of Brexit. Even the best possible deal will see us losing economic growth.
Well, the economic forecasts are that they're guesses into the future, and they're about what the level. They're about the best we've got. They're about what the levels of growth will be, and whether growth will be higher with this route or with that route. So it's about growth into the future, right? People know what they voted for, and in areas like mine, people will say, "Well, hang on a minute, we ain't got a lot to begin with." But having that democracy back is very, very important to people, and it's seen as a value by people. So, you know, I fully accept that you've been totally consistent in calling for a second referendum.
Yeah.
The illogic in your argument and the people's vote is you seem to think that the public's changed their view. I've seen no evidence of that at all. A second referendum would be the same result.
Well, let me pick up on that. I mean, isn't it time for a bit of realism? Let me just put to you what the EU official Sabine Vejan said. Cakeism is found on Remain's side as well as Leave. The chances for a reversal of Brexit are non-existent.
Well,
do you accept that?
I mean, for me, it's a principle. The people's vote is a principle. I mean, it seriously is, because...
But isn't it time now, when we've only got a few weeks until Brexit actually happens, to put those principles to one side and try and compromise?
Time for some leadership. If Theresa May knows full well that if she were to agree to a second referendum, a final say, a ratification of the deal that she's offering the people, by the people, then people like me, MPs like me, would vote for it. I would vote for her deal, help to get it over the line, if she agrees to put it to the people for ratification. I think
isn't that worth compromising on?
I'd say it's not needed. I mean, you know, the question could be no deal versus going back in. So there's different variations of the question. What I'm hearing and what I want to see is let's get on with it. There is a deal. The deal can be improved.
How many Labour MPs are in the same camp as you who would help Theresa May get this deal over the line?
Someone gave a figure today of 40 to 60. I don't think that's an unreasonable guesstimate. But the deal needs improving. And, I mean, if Jeremy Corbyn whips in favour of the deal, it'll get through by a very large majority. But I'm not sure that's going to happen. But the coming together of the Corbyn agenda and the May agenda, he put 5 points forward. She's accepted 3.5 of them, and that's straight away. That's a lot of movement over the weekend.
But I think what would make life a lot easier for all of us, John, is if we accepted the principle that whatever the deal is that Parliament agrees to in the end goes back to the people for ratification. That's a very sound principle. Whatever the deal is.
And Angela Smith made quite a few concessions tonight.
And people who support no deal, like Boris Johnson, and people like Angela, can vote together for entirely opposite reasons against a deal. That doesn't take us any... What would happen next? And if that went through, no one can then answer what would happen next. So the country would be back in the mess. What I want to see is bringing the country together to move forward. We've got a democracy. Let's use it.
Very briefly, I mean, you could see the divisions between the two of you. Have you had any discussions, Angela Smith, about joining a new centrist party, yes or no?
No. I mean, what I will say is I think MPs are being pushed, Labour MPs are being pushed to the very edge by the attitude of the leadership on key issues such as Brexit, anti-Semitism, where John and I are absolutely as one.
We'll have to debate that on another day, but thank you both very much. Angela Smith and John Mann, thank you.
Well, if what business wants is clarity over Brexit, another day has passed with the likelihood of any kind of decision pushed further into the future. Although the Prime Minister will make a statement to MPs tomorrow, she won't bring her Brexit deal back to the Commons for a showdown vote until 2 weeks tomorrow. In the meantime, she has offered more talks with Jeremy Corbyn. But Brexiters in her party are worried the Labour leader is leading her astray.
The handshake this afternoon was with her Maltese counterpart, but notice the flash of red on her shoes for a hint of who else the Prime Minister's trying to bring to heel. These negotiations designed to please Conservative MPs, while her government also signals to Labour.
I definitely would feel comfortable voting alongside Labour. I think it's great that this could be a national project where we could get all parties to vote together, but there are some disagreements still.
Most of them contained in a reply to this letter from Jeremy Corbyn. Last night, the Prime Minister wrote back that one problem is his demand for a customs union. She insists her deal already explicitly provides for the benefits of a customs union, but others note she didn't quite rule one out.
I mean, I think Corbyn's option is absolute madness.
Which begs an obvious question about the Prime Minister pursuing it.
Are you concerned that the Prime Minister is now flirting with Labour's position on Brexit? And what do you think would happen to the Conservative Party if she does tack towards a customs union?
Well, I don't think that there's any mileage for the Prime Minister or for the government in trying to do a deal with Labour, because they will just try to trap Theresa May. And if you're going to stay in the customs union and the single market, and you're going to have people around the table in Brussels, there's a name for that, isn't there? It's called being in the EU.
But somehow the Prime Minister's got to overturn this opposition to her Brexit deal. In January, 202 MPs voted in favour, but 432 against. If she gets the legal guarantee she's looking for on the Irish backstop, she might win over 90 or so Conservatives, plus the DUP. And with extra concessions, perhaps 26 Labour MPs who've already been willing to rebel against their party. But the more she pivots to Labour, the more Brexit-backing Conservatives she risks losing.
It seems to be talk after talk after talk and nothing happening.
Progress isn't easy when Labour's also divided. In Leave seats like Grimsby, MPs attempted to back a deal.
That means making sure that Labour's position is something that we try and draw the Prime Minister much closer to. If we can do that, then it makes it a lot harder for the Labour Party to say it's not going to support it.
But others will only do so if there's a second referendum. Today, one MP delivered a petition to her own party.
Any deal agreed by the Prime Minister should go back to the people, and if Jeremy Corbyn is involved in that, he can press that point on Theresa May.
Tomorrow, the Prime Minister faces all those factions updating MPs yet again. With little to say since last time, they'll be sure to fill the silence. But Parliament's still no closer to speaking with one clear voice. Paul Brand, News at 10, Westminster.
Well, tonight, the Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, has been in Brussels having dinner with Michel Barnier, and Angus Walker is there. Angus, did anything come out of tonight's meeting, tonight's dinner?
Well, this dinner at the UK ambassador's residence here in Brussels finished about an hour ago, and it's all part of the process, we're told. That's the phrase you hear from government officials. Stephen Barclay was there with David Lidington, with the UK's negotiator Ollie Robbins. Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, was there with some of his team as well. But these are described as talks, as discussions rather than negotiations. That's the terminology that Downing Street likes to use as well. A chance for the Brexit Secretary to look at Michel Barnier and describe some of the ideas that Theresa May has been talking about during her trips to Dublin, Belfast and Brussels last week, to go through some of the options on the Irish backstop, which the British government desperately needs if it's going to get a majority in the House of Commons. The talks described as constructive by Michel Barnier. When he came out, he did pause and have a few words with us. He said from our side, though, that we are not going to reopen the withdrawal agreement. So this might be the third Brexit Secretary that Michel Barnier has sat across a table from in Brussels, but really the position on the backstop isn't changing.
All right, Angus, thanks very much indeed.